Well, thanks for this.
I appreciate it.
Yeah.
It's really exciting.
Number 2 episode on the podcast.
Yeah.
So I think the best place to start is probably the beginning. What got you into conducting? How did it all start for you?
I used to play the violin in a lot of orchestras, youth orchestras and things. And I used to sit there when I wasn't playing. I'd be watching the conductor all the time, and I got more and more interested in what they were doing that made the orchestra sound different, you know, that inspired us, things that worked, things that didn't work. And I gradually got more interested in it through that. And then when I was even towards the end of high school age, I kind of dipped my toe into the water. One of the teachers at my school let me conduct the Mozart wind serenade, the Grand Partita serenade, with some of the, my fellow pupils, and that was great. And when I was at university, I did a lot, and we put on concerts ourselves. You'd have to do everything, setting up the music stands, posters, everything, and it was kind of exciting, and I kind of got the bug from there, I think you could say.
Yeah. So do you study conducting at university?
No, I did a general music degree at Cambridge University, and it was a very sort of, you could say, academic course with history, harmony, counterpoint, analysis, all that kind of thing. And actually performing was quite a small part of the degree. I believe now it's changed and it's a little bit more integrated. But at that time, I did still spend all my time either playing the violin or conducting, sort of in my spare time, and then just kind of did all my essays and things, usually at the last minute, kind of the night before,
the last minute cram.
Yeah, exactly. That's
cool.
It's great.
Do you So do you ever dabble on the keyboard, or is it always just violin for you?
Yeah, so I play the piano as well. I play violin and piano. They were always roughly equal, and they would kind of go up and down depending on
how much you're practicing.
Yeah, how much I'm practicing. Sometimes the teacher would give me a piece that I would really get into, and then I would sort of practice that more, and then so it would go kind of swings and roundabouts that way. Piano is definitely something I still use, in the opera world. As you know, it's very helpful to be able to play the piano, playing for rehearsals or coaching singers and things. You can just get down and bash it out. It's not being a concert pianist. It's a different thing. So.
Do you ever do coachings using that skill, or do you ever work as like a repetiteur or a coach, or is it always just been conducting?
Yes, I have done. So actually I did a few things, when I was starting out. I was 2 years at the Royal Opera House on their Yetta Parker Young Artist programme. Yep. And of course there, you were talking about the top level of the profession. So you start out by doing lots of the small jobs. I mean, I say small jobs, they're actually huge jobs. Playing the piano for a rehearsal is kind of one of the hardest things.
Oh,
it's one of the orchestra. Biggest jobs in the opera house, absolutely. And I remember one of my first jobs was to play piano for a revival of Traviata.
Wow. With
an Italian conductor, and it was full on, straight in the deep end, but it was a great experience. You learn a lot that way, and as you say, coaching singers, playing for other people's coachings, playing for language coachings, that sort of thing. I learned a huge amount there about working with singers, I think, and sort of, for me, that's important that an opera conductor has that experience. It isn't because, if you come just from the symphonic world, which some people do that, it's harder to connect with the stage and to know what it is that actually they need from you on stage when they're up there. So I
think being in the room is one of the biggest teachers. Just being a fly on the wall. I know with stuff I've done, I always lessons and coachings are great, but you are, how do I put this? I think being in the space with other performers, other musicians, just grows and expands your whole vocal vocabulary, your music vocabulary, and everything just doubles. I think it's that you're kind of forced to compete at their level as well.
That's right. I mean, I think that's one of the things that makes Glyndebourne so amazing, is that all of you guys there in the chorus you're all young artists in your own right, and but you're there in a sort of group setting. However, you're seeing the very best, the best of the best on stage, doing their thing, and watching the way that they interact with each other, with the stage director. Also, there are great production teams here and a good amount of rehearsal time. So that there's actually, it's a deeper level of work than you get in some other situations where things are a bit more compressed in terms of the rehearsal time. And
also, we mingle a lot between soloists, chorus, musicians, whereas some places you don't have that opportunity at all. It's you stay in your section, you stay in your lane.
Exactly.
Whereas I've loved just watching how the guys attack the recit. It's just fantastic to watch. Herman, Jonah, all the guys, they're just on it, and it's fantastic to watch and to listen to.
Absolutely. And then seeing the input that they get from someone like Annabelle Arden, the stage director, who's got very strong ideas about how she wants it to be played, and the way that is then integrated with the artistry that they're bringing from perhaps other productions that they've done. No, it's fascinating. And yeah, I think you're right. The social element here, everyone's mixing. I think it's to do with the fact we're in the countryside and we're kind of cut off. Exactly. We're in this little opera bubble.
You can't escape to the pub.
You can't. Well, I mean, you can. Always is a good idea. But no, it's sort of, it's nice. You know, I think sometimes you can learn a lot of the same things in a city-based opera house, like the Royal Opera House. But usually in the lunch breaks, then everyone just kind of scatters off. To wherever, whereas here everyone's in the cafe and you can absolutely, it's a special atmosphere.
Do you have any specific repertoire you enjoy conducting the most?
Oh, that's a really hard question. I would say I genuinely do enjoy whatever I'm doing. I know that's kind of a cliched answer, but I genuinely
very
enjoy
diplomatic.
I mean, whatever I'm doing at that given moment, I do enjoy just because I think as a conductor, our job is to try and motivate everyone around us and also kind of bring out what we think the composer wanted. And so I get a sort of pleasure from that, regardless of whether it's Rossini or Puccini or Benjamin Britten or Philip Glass, or, you know, like it could be anything, but there's still I mean, the music I love. I mean, I love sort of the big romantic repertoire, whether it's the big Italian repertoire, Puccini, Verdi, and so on, and also the Germanic repertoire, Wagner, Strauss, and actually Czech repertoire. I mean, I adore Janacek. I always have loved Janacek's operas, and I mean, doing something like the Barber of Seville, it presents its own challenges of how to pace it and how to keep it sort of sparkling and light, and that's enjoyable. That can be very enjoyable repertoire to work on as well.
It's cool. Yeah. It kind of touches on one of my later questions was, when you come to a new work or a piece that you're doing, do you strive for that artistic integrity and historical accuracy, or do you play between the lines with that a little bit? Do you try to bring yourself to the piece in terms of how you attack it?
That's a really interesting question. I think, I think my starting point is always from some level of historical research. And for the Barber of Seville, I looked at, I mean, we're working from a relatively new critical edition that was made, which a critical edition means a sort of new study of all the someone has gone out there and
collected
gone in all the libraries and gone through all these dusty manuscripts, and they'll get very excited about, you know, there's a semiquaver here and everyone usually plays a quaver and so on. So it gets very geeky and kind of, but I quite enjoy that sort of level of geekery on some level, and I think it's important to try and bring a spirit of that into the rehearsal room, so that we're not just, I mean, for me, the worst is a sense of routine where it's kind of just repeating things that people have maybe heard on recordings, or traditions that aren't necessarily based on any kind of reality of something that Rossini would have recognized. Because I think there are a lot of traditions creep into this bel canto repertoire, by which I mean things that aren't written down in the score, or whether it's interpolated high notes, or the way you do the cadenzas, the way you do the ornamentation. and those kind of things, I think it's really interesting to try and read about what we know happened in early performances, and the really interesting thing with this piece is, there is written evidence of somebody wrote down. I think it was the main tenor who sang Alma Viva was a guy called Manuel Garcia, and he apparently added very, very florid extra things, and that was where Rossini famously said, "Oh, that was beautiful, but I wonder who composed it," or something like that. Yeah. But interestingly, his son, Manuel Garcia's son, then later sort of wrote down some of his variations. And so in the back of these editions, you can look and you can see what we imagine is an accurate representation of what he would have done. Things that aren't actually printed in the score, but are sort of... Yeah. And so you can study those and you can sort of get an idea for the style of what they were doing. And then what's really nice is then you have the singers coming and they have their own ideas. And actually, at the time, things like ornamentation and decoration of vocal lines was done in a spirit of kind of a creative spirit. It wasn't necessarily fixed. Like they might do something different in every performance. Yeah. So it's almost like, but they knew the style so well because they were living it as it was being created. So, and that's what I think is really interesting to try and sort of recreate some of that. And then, do I bring some of my own? I mean, there are then you could say there are things then when you want it to try and sound fresh. So you might have some ideas where you think, okay, can we try this? I mean, I did a naughty thing where, because we've got the guitar in the first couple of numbers, it's notated there by Rossini, but then I added it in, as you probably noticed, in a few bars in the Figaro aria, where it's not written there. And, some musicologists would probably say it was absolutely wrong to do that. But I don't know. I just thought it was it adds a colour. I think also I know that when Rossini wrote it, he was very, very, it was very important for him that there was a flavour of Spain about the piece, that there was a sort of Spanish influence. And so, so trying to bring that in a little bit and that sort of thing.
It's playing in the lines a little bit.
Yeah, so. I think this repertoire, there is room for variation, for taking things with a pinch of salt and kind of adding, you can add things, you can, as long as it's within a sort of boundaries of what you think he might have thought was in good taste. I think that's it. It's to do it in a sort of sense of good taste. And but it absolutely wouldn't have been. I think if you go to it and you just say it has to be exactly what's written in the score, then that's wrong. That's just wrong.
Well, like you said, Rossini wasn't known for putting everything in the score.
No, exactly. And in the manuscripts, he never actually writes things out the second time. He just writes as before, or he puts little repeat signs because he was in a hurry. They probably didn't have so much ink. They had to do everything was with those old-fashioned pens with ink.
The candles were running down.
The candles, candlelight. It was a different time, and so
the pressure to get these operas churned out was different as well.
That's exactly right. And when it comes to a cadenza point, in which there are so many, he just puts a pause sign there, sort of fermata, pause sign, and it was just understood that this is where the singer does something.
Does their thing.
Yeah.
Was that something that was a bit of a challenge for you when you were starting out as a conductor, to try and have the confidence to put your own mark on what you were doing?
Yes, I think so. I actually think these pieces are really difficult. I first did the Barbara Seville 20 years ago, and I was working on it with Sir Mark Elder, so I was his assistant for a production at the Royal Opera House, and he is someone who, as you probably know, comes at things with a vast amount of knowledge, a vast amount of experience, and also a constant desire to want it to be not routine, and not, that everything is being re-examined when he's in the room, and which is fantastic. So I learned a lot from that. But I think when I first conducted it myself, I probably I think now I kind of I do more of my own research into things. I think when I started out, I probably accepted traditions and things that I'd heard on recordings too easily. I think I probably wasn't questioning enough, and now I'm more questioning, so that I try and have a good reason for doing, not just because I think it sounds good, but because there's a good reason for choices that we make. I know it's a very, I don't know if that makes sense. I
think it does.
I think what I would say, I think I feel more confident with the piece now than I did then, and I think actually it does benefit from experience for sure.
Do you think that's more confident in yourself as an artist and a conductor? Because I know as a young artist starting out, I often racked with doubts about, is this correct? Like on paper, I know it should be okay, and I've studied and I know that it should be okay, but I still don't have that confidence at all times to be like, no, this is what I'm going with. This is
exactly. I think that's right. I think sometimes it takes getting it wrong a few times to know what the correct flow of a piece should be, and that goes for any piece actually. But to give you an example, in the Barbara Seville, I was remembering the other day that one of the first times I conducted it, in the trio, the start of the trio in Act 2, which starts with an accompanying thing in the strings that goes da 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 da. I'm fairly sure that I conducted that sort of in eight beats to the bar, so like in quavers or eighth notes, like da 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 da. And now I don't do that at all. Now I just do da 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 da. And that's something about, probably when I was starting out, I was nervous about wanting it to be together, wanting it to be really clear like this. But then after a while, you realize that can get in the way of the music as well. Yeah. And then sometimes a good orchestra doesn't need that.
Exactly. I think a lot of people forget that the people in the pit, they've been doing it all their lives. They are fantastic. They are the best of the best at what they do.
Yeah. That's right. I mean, this orchestra here, the London Philharmonic, it's kind of like, actually it was Herman, our Figaro. So I heard he said it to them, a few players in the Courtyard Cafe. He sort of said, this orchestra is a Ferrari. and he's right, because it's like a really amazing car when you don't need to kind of press the accelerator very much. You just tap it and it takes off. It goes. And I mean, that's like this. You don't need to give them a lot. You give them an indication of something and they kind of go with it, and they're very responsive and they've played the piece many times before as well.
That's cool. How do you approach new works now? What is your process for, say someone gives you an opera, it doesn't have to be a new piece, it could be part of the repertoire, but you haven't done it before. What's your steps that you take to prepare?
It depends on the piece. I think if it's something that is kind of what you could say standard repertoire, I listen to recordings, but not just one. Like try and listen to many different recordings. I play it at the piano, try and get a feel for, and that's kind of just a bashing sort of. That could be a really ugly process. That's not beautiful playing. That's just kind of getting the feel for the harmonies, feel for the how's it put together, and then obviously making sure that you have a translation of the text. And this is the same for singers. I mean, it has to sort of start from the text, and you get a good translation, or you translate it yourself word by word, and you go through it so that you really know what every word means. And then, you're putting all those blocks together, I guess. And then I would say one of the last things I do is then go to the orchestral score, and then you sort of learn the orchestration and things. And I think that process still goes on, even if it's an opera. That process is still happening. If you're in the rehearsal room, you've got the piano there, and it's really lovely because you've got hours of rehearsals just with piano. And so you're conducting that, and then at the same time you've got the orchestral score in front of you with all the colours and all the different instruments where they come in, and you start to learn that even more. Oh, how's that going to? And you imagine in your head, how's that going to sound with a clarinet? And and you also, that's a nice dialogue you can have with the repetiteur. trying to make that sound as it will, and that's helpful for the singers, so that then when we come to the orchestra rehearsals, there isn't a big jump from the pianist hasn't been playing it in a way that's totally different from
yeah.
And the good repetiteurs, we have the top class ones here.
Mm-hmm.
They do that. That's their job. That they love doing that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's good if the conductor is part of that process as well.
Do you have coachings, or do you go talk to someone who's done it previously that you might be colleagues with? Or do you talk to people?
Yeah, funny, conductors, in my experience, conductors don't talk to each other as much as maybe they should.
We'll just watch
microphone.
It's all good.
Yeah, maybe conductors don't talk to each other as much as they should. I mean, I do have people, I've had some amazing mentors in my career. When I was starting out, I was assistant for, I mentioned Mark Elder, but also Antonio Papano, I worked with a lot. And so I've been through the whole score of La Bohème with him, for example, which is sort of invaluable because he's a great Puccini conductor. He's recorded the piece with top, it's to get those kind of insights where he'll just say, oh, make sure you're not too slow here, or oh, make sure you give the clarinet the cue here, or don't look at the horns here because they'll be nervous about splitting their high note, or there can be all kinds of things. And then even the language, actually the last time I did La Bohème was here on the tour about 2.5, 3 years ago, and actually this is amazing to think of, but because she just very, very sadly passed away a few weeks ago or a month ago, but Maria Cleva, who was a great lady, absolutely amazing Italian coach, many years at Covent Garden, and also teaching in all the London colleges. And I had, I wrote to her and I said, look, even though that's a standard piece, standard repertoire piece, La Bohème, which I've done before, conducted it before, but I thought, gosh, I really want to go through this text again, and I really want to make sure that I'm pronouncing it exactly right, that I've got all the colours right. So we had she was so kind, we had a couple of Zoom calls, and she was there on the other, it was very nice to see her on the computer. And I was kind of, mangling the text, going through and sort of reading it, and she'd tell me, no, it's a darker vowel, or it's a long vowel there, it's a double, don't forget the double consonant here, all that kind of thing. And
the dreaded double consonants.
Oh my goodness. So I mean, there's so much, and that was interesting for me because that was a piece I already knew. So in a way, I didn't need to do it, but I wanted to try and be really well prepared. And then I think as a conductor, then it gives you more authority in the rehearsal room. If you're asking singers to do things.
Yeah, definitely.
You're asking them to do things differently maybe than what they had imagined. So you'd better be able to pronounce the words properly and, really know every word, the meaning of every word.
Yeah.
And I think that's a great process also singers are used to doing that, right? Singers, if they're learning a role, there's a lot of language coaching goes into it. That's a big part of it. And but I think for conductors too, it's really helpful for us to have that all in our body, as it were, kind of internalized. And then we can kind of live it with the singers as they're doing it.
I imagine it'd help a lot when it comes to phrasing. Just knowing how the consonants you got to get out, the vowels, and just having a sense of what's coming out of the person's mouth and where they need to actually breathe and how that might affect this orchestra.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, another thing I find very interesting is kind of historical recordings. So if you take Puccini as an example.
The Tosti? Isn't it the Tosti? It's the...
Toscanini.
That's the one.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I mean, I absolutely adore the Toscanini recording of La Bohème, because
it's very interesting, isn't it?
It's very interesting because I think Puccini performance over the years has got slower and slower, and actually there's anecdotal evidence. Again, this I think is where kind of historical background reading things really helps, because I read that Puccini would be in the rehearsal room and he was forever saying, "Oh, maestro, with life, with life, don't let it sit." And I think that's, he hated it if people kind of, when he'd write a pause or there'd be a high note, of course it was flexible. He didn't want people to be like a rigid thing. Yeah. But he hated it if people just sat there on a high note. Like everything had to be moving to the next thing, always flowing and letting, and all about the drama, keeping the drama alive. And I think that's where Toscanini was incredible. And I mean, sometimes it sounds a bit hard driven, particularly to our ears when we're used to, I don't know, a slower version.
Yeah, definitely.
But it's so exciting, I think, and it really is very moving as well when it's rattling along, and it's very intense, and also then the phrasing. You don't get people are then at the right tempo. Then you don't need to breathe. Suddenly, you don't need to breathe in the middle of a phrase, or you don't need to breathe.
Keeping that energy and that forward momentum.
Yeah.
Keep the drama and everything alive and,
exactly,
like you said, living, vibrant.
That's right. And I think, you hear something like that, but then the last thing you should do is try and copy it. But you can sort of listen to other versions, get a feeling for those, I'm talking old recordings, crackly old ones. And that really can be interesting, I think. Also for singers, hearing the way that people... with Barbara Seville, I heard there's some interesting recordings of singers from even the 1920s, really early 20th century. There are these sort of wax cylinder recordings, and it's fascinating. It's not to say that they were doing it the way because it's still a long time after the piece was written, but probably a little bit closer to. You're getting closer and closer to the time of the composition of the piece, and so you're maybe getting something back that occasionally is lost today.
We're very lucky to have Spotify, YouTube, and we can access these recordings that are hundreds of years old.
That's right. It must have been so much harder before. I have a sort of love-hate relationship with the internet, and sometimes I wish, could we go back to just, low tech, but actually that is the one massive, massive advantage that we have now of just being able to listen to anything so quickly.
Yeah.
And not having to go to, I don't know, the British Library or something and of ask for some document,
Following on that train of thought, do you have any idols, any conductors throughout history that you're like, they are my idol, they're the person that I like to, not imitate's the wrong word, but I take a lot away from, inspired you?
Oh, gosh. Well, one person that springs to mind actually is Charles Mackerras.
Okay.
Because he was somebody who I think was an incredible musician and incredibly versatile in that he was, he conducted the classical repertoire so beautifully and elegantly and with such a freshness. Mozart, and he changed the way he did Mozart. He was always trying to, like we were saying, he made his own additions. So he wouldn't necessarily go with whatever the new Bärenreiter edition is, whatever. He would make his own, and he would go to the manuscripts himself and do it because he wanted it so specifically the way he wanted it. And he would mark all his orchestra parts meticulously with dynamics and things, phrasings. And then, he was the guy who brought Janacek to prominence when nobody was really playing that music. He did all those sort of pioneering recordings.
Yeah.
He was a great Verdi conductor. I remember seeing him do Ballo in Mascara, and just he had that sort of flexibility of his beat. So if a singer got a bit out, he knew how to get back in.
Yeah.
Very, very flexible, very good technique, and just an amazing. I never worked with him. I was supposed to assist him, but it didn't happen. And I think he was very special. And then other people. I mean, gosh, I like some of the old German conductors for Wagner. There's Hans Knappertsbusch,
What a name.
Yeah, some of those old recordings from Bayreuth are just incredible. Yeah.
How much do you think, how do I phrase this? When conducting, do you think there is an element of leeway in your phrases and how you conduct? Like you said, you touched on about how he'd have such a vagueness that the singer could kind of get back in.
Yeah.
Can you expand on that a little bit more?
Yeah, I think conducting is a mixture of leading and following. I think what makes good, in my opinion, what makes good opera conducting is partly knowing when to lead and when to follow. And it's not always right to always just listen to the singer and kind of follow what they're doing. Sometimes you need to push forwards, or you have to lead the singer. Because as the conductor, you're kind of responsible for the dramatic pulse of the thing. And you have the power to, particularly in the Italian repertoire, I think you have the ability to make either a good, exciting performance of a piece or a kind of a boring one. It can go either way. And I think it's a lot down to how the conductor sets the tempi, how the conductor manages the sort of flow of it. And for that's something that the singers can't possibly, they're only doing their individual parts. So it needs that overview, I think.
Yeah.
But at the same time, actually one of the great things about, I think, conducting opera is that you learn a certain flexibility that just the way the voice speaks is different from how instruments speak to some extent. And so you need sometimes flexibility for the singers to breathe. You need to wait a bit longer sometimes at the end of a phrase, so that for the orchestra, it's not just strictly 1, 2, 3, 4. It might be 1, 2, 3, 4, or things like that. So you learn that flexibility, and then you're trying to keep the flexibility, but keep the sense of the structure, so that it doesn't get too mushy, as it were. So it's always a kind of balancing thing. I remember reading that Sir Colin Davis said that conducting was like holding a small bird, and you had to hold the bird, closely enough that it doesn't fly away, but obviously you can't hold it too tightly. Yeah.
That's a good
which
analogy.
I thought was a lovely. He was amazing with great analogies.
What's something you wish singers knew about conducting? That's tricky.
I don't really know the answer to that. I think it helps I think that goes also for orchestral musicians, that it's helpful to have some experience of conducting or have done. It doesn't have to be a lot, just like a couple of classes or maybe a few. I know nowadays in colleges they do actually teach it sometimes as a sort of second study or as a module or something. And I think it's helpful because I think if nothing else, you have an appreciation for what the process is and what the difficulties are in conducting. I think particularly for orchestra, it's helpful for people to have a go, and then they realise that it's perhaps slightly harder than they thought it was. Yeah.
Is there something you'd like to see in, say, for example, a singer's coming to the first rehearsal? Is there something you'd like to see from a singer when they first come to the rehearsal room?
Yes. I would say a big thing is curiosity. So I think some of the best singers I've worked with have been people who are always striving to be better and are always curious to know if I or if the assistant conductor or if the music staff or the production team, if there's anything they can do to improve, to be hungry for that, hungry for that sort of self-improvement. I've seen that with young artists. I've seen that with young singers who've then gone on to have major careers. I think because they had that burning...
That hunger. They want to be as good as they can be.
And I've seen it also with very established star singers. Sometimes you think, not always the case, but some of the top people are like that too, and they've been on the circuit for years and years and years, and you think, God, wouldn't they be really jaded and just sort of uninterested in improving or changing what they might have done a million times before? But they're not. I mean, I remember seeing, for example, rehearsals with Placido Domingo rehearsing Tristan with Papano conducting, and And he was always asking, "Oh, what can I? This can be better. Am I pronouncing this word correctly? And how do you want me to? Am I moving with you enough there?" And it was always that sort of dialogue where you could easily imagine someone at that level sitting back and sort of coasting or thinking, I've got this nailed. I don't need anyone's input. The worst thing I think for a conductor is when you have a singer who maybe doesn't want to hear any notes and doesn't want to. Having said that, you do also then get great artists who have such a strong flavour of what they're doing that they maybe get their feedback from elsewhere. So maybe they have coaches that they've trusted for years and years, and they get their feedback from them. Because also what's tricky in an opera rehearsal room is that lots of people are coming together, but they may have never met each other before.
Yeah.
So when we have the first day of rehearsals here for Barbara Seville, I've got singers coming who I've never met before, never worked with before. So am I going to immediately tell them how to do their role, which they've maybe done 100 times before? They don't know who I am. They don't know if they can trust me. So part of the rehearsal process is actually establishing trust.
Yeah.
So that then people say, okay, this guy obviously knows the opera, or, maybe I can take on some feedback from here that's going to help my performance. And if that usually is a good thing, I think. But I've also, I remember hearing about John Vickers, for example. Okay. John Vickers, sang famous performances of Peter Grimes, for example, at Covent Garden. And I heard a story that one of the music staff would come and to give him some notes, and he took off his shoe and he just threw the shoe at the door because he didn't want to hear any notes. He said, "No, sure." And there's sort of, there's that type of, and I mean, he had that kind of animal sort of magnetism and kind of force of nature personality, and he knew what he wanted in the role, and he perhaps had his own process for getting to the top level, but he was absolutely a phenomenal artist. So it's a very tricky dynamic, and you don't want to be the sort of singer who is just always trying to please other people and trying to do what they're told all the time, because you have to have a bit of, what it's like being up there on stage. You need that confidence. You need to believe in yourself. You need to, and I mean, actually, as conductors, we also have to, and coaches, we have to be careful not to give people too many notes. We have to be careful to give people the right notes at the right time.
Build them up.
Build people up, and not just constantly be chipping away with small details when maybe they actually need. Sometimes the best notes can be quite vague. They can be like, "Oh, you need to smile more," or "You need to be a bit more." Something, it can be to do with the character, and if you give a note to do with the character, that can transform the performance more than a million notes about, oh, this word needs to be this way, and
You don't want a nervous wreck on performance day. I mean, one of my pet peeves is notes on the day. I hate notes before I'm about to go on stage.
Yeah, that's tricky, and it's tricky especially once you do a long run of many performances. You might want to give notes, but you don't want to knock people's confidence off. And that depends on the personality. Some singers love getting notes and some don't want it. And you have to kind of read the room a little bit and see what everyone, that's where it becomes sort of psychology job,
Well, last question, because we're going to get you some lunch before you go back out there. Opera or symphonic works, or what's your favourite? What do you like conducting the most?
Oof. Well,
a hard one.
That's really hard. I like doing both. I've been lucky in that I've got to do, over the years, I've got to do a bit of both. And it's a different way of working. So opera is longer. It's almost more like kind of having a normal job, quote unquote. You're part of a big team of people, which I really love that aspect of it, I have to say. But with an orchestra, it can also be nice because you've only got a couple of days maybe to put something together. So it's kind of like making a stir fry, as opposed to a sort of slow cooked roast.
Crock pot,
It's like a stir fry. You have to make something quickly. And I mean, that's an interesting challenge. And of course, the symphonic repertoire is great as well, too. There's so much great music out there, and I think, whatever you're in the moment is usually prety exciting.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for coming on today.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Thanks very much. Thanks for your great questions.
Thank you. Easy as that.